horse that she bred, and her best friend, Jagger Bomb. Please welcome Great Britain's Becky Moody!
Becky Moody and Jagger Bomb. They just won the World Cup finals in Dallas-Fort Worth with this incredible freestyle. I mean, this combination is just unbelievable. The harmony, the partnership, the connection. She's had Jagger Bomb since he was a baby. She bred him herself. And today I am bringing you a behind the scenes interview that I got to do at World Cup with both Becky Moody and Steffen Peters. You're not going to want to miss this exclusive interview. They shared some incredible behind the scenes stuff. These guys are real riders. They're real horsemen, just like us, working on all the same things, getting their horse on the aids, getting their horse better relaxed. This is an incredible interview, and here are some highlights that you're not going to want to miss.
Thank you so much for being here, Becky. Congratulations on your ride last night. What were some highlights for you?
Thank you. Well, I always say with Bomb that he's not exceptional at anything. He's just really good at it all. So there weren't really particular highlights. I think it was just a good overall, solid performance. So I was just so thrilled with him.
Yeah.
I was a little bit ahead of the judges, and there were a few movements, like especially your right pirouette. I said, that's got to be a 9. Yeah. And sure enough, the judges listened. But there
Are you thinking about becoming a judge?
No, but and like I said, it was so well done, and on top of a homebred horse.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Very cool.
And tell us a little bit where the name came from, Jagger Bomb.
So I don't know if in the States you have Jagger Bombs.
Yeah.
So Jägermeister and Red Bull. And obviously I bred Bomb, he was born 12 years ago, and it might have been that at that point in time I was partial to a Jagger Bomb on a night out. I now have to drink them because obviously my horse is called Jagger Bomb, but I have maybe OD'd on them a tiny bit. I think at our post-Paris party I probably drank about 30 because everyone just kept coming up to me and being like, the Bomb! So I clearly had to drink it at that point. It was not pretty the next morning.
That's my point about Jagger Bombs, not about your horse, of course, but the drink. Whatever it is, it never ends well. Never does.
But yeah, he is incredible.
And homebred.
Yeah, so his mum was a jazz mare that I bought from the Equine Elite auction in Holland. Actually as a 7-year-old, but super green. She hadn't really done anything. She was still with the breeder at that point. And I trained her. She was a typical jazz. So she was quite feisty, quite spooky, didn't have the easiest neck in the world. But she was very talented for the Grand Prix work. we didn't really compete all that much. She was ready to go Grand Prix very nearly, and then badly damaged her hind fetlock in the field. So that was her competition career over. And I had 3 foals with her. Bomb was the third, the final one. And yeah, it's just one of those things. And I think, the reason that people love the story is it makes you realise it's doable, it's achievable. When you don't have a bottomless pit of money, it is something that you can still do if you're lucky.
Yeah, so how was he as a young horse? Like, what are some challenges that you've had to overcome with him?
So he's always been a total sweetheart, the most amazing temperament. He was super easy to back, very genuine. When he was 4 years old, he was already taking his stablemates out hacking because he was the dependable, reliable one. And all my girls that work for me, they all hack him out. Everyone rides Bomb. But he, as a young horse, was a little bit lazy. A little bit boring. He didn't really articulate his joints very well. He was a little bit of a little bit more of a straight leg mover. Didn't have a medium trot. I did a Instagram Q&A a couple of years ago, and someone said, "Oh, do you have any video of him as a young horse?" And I sort of scrolled through and found a video of him doing our regional championships at like elementary level. I think he was 5, and even then he had this beautiful frame, lovely mouth, easy, but he just tootled around doing a sweet little tail. You didn't watch it and go, "Yeah, that horse is going to go to Paris." No, not even slightly. So yeah, the biggest thing that I've had to work on is definitely his sharpness, his self-motivation, which I think when you're training a Grand Prix horse, that's one of the most important things. They need energy. Energy is such a massive part of it. So we've always worked very hard on his fitness. He doesn't do a huge amount in the school. He probably only trains in the school 3-4 times a week, and then the rest of his work is strengthening and conditioning. We live in Yorkshire, where it's really good and hilly, so he does a lot of hill work and a little bit of like cardiovascular, canter work. But yeah, that was definitely the side that we had to work on the most.
Yeah. That's pretty impressive. I know a lot of us have horses that are a little laid back, and we'd like to get them a little sharper and a little hotter. What are some things that you do with Jagger Bomb to help keep that reactivity and that sensitivity, especially when you go in and you can't have a whip in the Grand Prix?
It depends if you had some Jagger Bombs the night before.
Yeah.
So you got to differentiate that.
So I actually very rarely ride him with a whip, because I know that I can't when the trips are down. And actually, I don't feel it's massively beneficial with him to have it all the time. It's something that I would just maybe pick it up for a couple of minutes and then put it down again. The walk is so important, but I also think it's the hardest pace to have a horse truly in front of the leg, because when you are trotting and cantering, the natural momentum of the horse helps take it forward. And I think that getting it good in the walk is a real test of how good you actually have it. Fundamentally, transitions all the time. I think I would not ride a quarter of a circle without riding a transition. And that might not be a full transition, it might just be a tiny half hole, a little acceleration, but it's something that is saying, stay awake, are you here, are you with me? It's as important that the horse is waiting on your core as it is that they're forward off your leg when you're getting to that higher level. But I think with him, something that I use a lot in my training is that actually when I want the horse to react to the leg, if they're a horse that is dull, I take my leg away very quickly. So I take it off like I'm also almost going to give them a bit of a, but I don't. I just take it away very fast. And I find that a really incredibly useful tool, because it works for 2 different reasons. 1, the horse learns to go without the leg. And 2, it makes the rider loosen their leg. because half the problem when you have a rider with a lazy horse is that the leg gets stuck on, and it's too, working too hard and too tight. So by making the rider take their leg away, that actually helps to loosen and take the leg down and longer. So yeah, that would be one of my biggest things, that and transitions. In the UK, we have actually just introduced a rule that we can now use our voice in the test. Wow. So, yeah. But I think I'm lucky enough to train with Carl Hester, and he does quite often say to me, "Quick to clicking, you are not a dolphin trainer." So I am a little bit of a...
Same here.
Yeah. That's wonderful, and it's so wonderful to hear, because I know a lot of us struggle with getting our horses more forward, and those are some great action items that we can all take home and implement. I especially love the legs away. I rode Western for a while, and that was kind of one thing that they taught us in Western was like you'd open your leg to get the horse to go forward. It does really work, so I definitely recommend trying that out. Can you, both of you are Olympians, what is the mindset like going into a big stadium, like filled with people, with your horse? How do you prepare mentally for a big competition?
I think...
it feels really good to hold that trophy high. just to let you know.
So the first thing I'm going to say is that I function better when I'm coming into the event as an underdog. I prefer that, so let's not go there. No, I think, so for me there's sort of two things to answer here. The first thing is you have to know yourself. You have to know yourself as a person and what you need in the run-up to something like that. And it doesn't matter whether it's your local club event or your club event at the weekend is as important to you as our Olympics are to us. It doesn't matter. And I think, for me, a massive part of my preparation is the people that I have around me. So I don't like to be on my own. I like to have people around me, certain people. And I also have to stay quite busy. Before I rode in Paris, I didn't go and watch the competition. I watched the warm-up a lot, but I didn't watch any of the competition because I know that raises my anxiety levels. When I'm done, then I love to go and watch the competition. But I think, people are different. I know, some of my teammates would take themselves off and have a few hours completely on their own, quiet, just to focus. Everybody is different. So the first thing is make sure that you know yourself. And then the second thing really is, very, very similar to what Steffen was saying. You have to trust the process. We have all been working with those horses that we're taking to those competitions for a long, long time. And I think I learned one very important lesson from my other sort of long-term coach and mentor, David Hunt. And it was when I first started training with him, which is probably 24 years ago, something like that now. The first thing that I will say about David is that I hated him to start off with. No, not him, his lessons. I hated his coaching. And it was actually my sister that wanted to train. It was through British Dressage. It was a training program that they organised, and he came and did some clinics. And but the reason that I didn't like him was because he was actually very honest, and he said a few things that I probably didn't want to hear at that point in my life, when I thought I was maybe slightly better than I actually was. But one thing that he said to me that was a real light bulb moment for me was I had a horse who had been incredibly successful at small tour. He'd won team medals as a young rider horse with me. He'd won the national championships at PSG and Inter One. And I was really struggling to make the step to Grand Prix. I had been training with a coach who was amazing. He had helped me win those youth medals and national championships, but he wasn't actually a Grand Prix rider. And we we'd missed things out in the training of that horse because we were both relatively inexperienced at that time. And although I did already have a horse that I'd trained to Grand Prix, this one was a little more complicated and it didn't go so well. And I can remember I'd taken him, I can't remember if it was an Institute or a Grand Prix, but I'd gone to his competition and I was really pleased with how he warmed up. And then I was speaking to David on the phone afterwards, and I sort of said to him, you know, he warmed up really good, and he felt really good going around the edge of the arena, and then I just turned onto the centre line, and I just felt like he dropped me. And he said to me, well, actually, first of all, there was just this silence at the end of the phone, which you're like, oh, here we go. And then he said to me, and how does he know the difference between one side of the whiteboards and the other? And I was like, that is a very, very, very valid point. And, you know, that was a real turning point for me in terms of learning the understanding of taking responsibility for how your horse goes in the arena. They go how you ride them. And it was, you know, it was my mistake that horse dropped me in the arena. He didn't go, we're inside the whiteboards, I'm going to be really lazy now. You know, it was because I went into that arena and was like, I'm doing a test, let's be quiet. And I think, you know, that really was a turning point for me because it made me realise that one, you have to train your horses how you want them to go in the arena, and you have to ride in a way that you can ride them like that in the arena. And, you know, if you want to be able to go into a test and get those marks, you have to be training to get a 7 or an 8 in every single transition that you do, in every half pass that you do. If you want those marks, if you want an 8 for your free walk or your extended walk, you have to ride your free walk or your extended walk in your training for an 8 every time. Take responsibility. And then I think that puts a different spin on competing. And, you know, I always say to the guys that I'm coaching, like 90% of the time that I am competing to educate. I'm not going in there to ride my best possible test that time. I'm going in to train the horse to ride a better test next time. So if that needs, you know, that horse needs their hand holding, if I need to ride a slightly big pirouette, or I need to ride a more progressive transition, or, you know, I need to ride my flying change not exactly where it's meant to be because the timing wasn't quite right. I make those decisions, and I understand that the judges will have to mark accordingly, but I am doing that to help educate my horse so that next time they are more confident in me, more confident in themselves. And then, you know, if you ride your horses like that, then getting to the point where you can go in and perform at their best, it's just a more systematic sort of approach to it. And I think then you both become more confident in your system, and then it is easier to go in and perform when it really, really matters. The other thing that I also say to people is that a dressage test, don't think of it as a series of movements written down on a piece of paper. Think of it as a series of exercises that are actually designed to help your horse and how it goes. And I think, you know, there are definitely tests that do that more than others. You know, things really flow, they really help you work the suppleness or the straight. But if you think about it as a series of exercises, it also makes you think about it slightly differently.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. And I know a lot of us struggle with, I call it frozen rider syndrome, when you like go into a test and you're just like, oh my gosh, I have to make it happen now. And so it's great to hear that, like, to think of it always as training. I had a trainer tell me, she was like, until you're at the Olympics, you're always schooling your horse, even in the show ring. And I think that's really important too, because our horses feel that. You know, they're incredibly sensitive. And so they're like, why is mom holding her breath and not moving anymore? Like, something must be terribly wrong here. But, you know, it's all levels.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's really interesting to do is, you know, watch a warm-up and watch the competition. You know, sometimes follow riders from the warm-up to the test arena.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy as a rider when you are warming up, it's very easy to be distracted by the other riders in the warm-up and be like, oh, look at that horse's trot. Oh my gosh, don't they sit beautiful? That was a wonderful change. And, you know, sort of think, oh, well, that one's going to beat me and that one's going to beat me. But, you know, very often the people that win the warm-up actually really don't go in and do nearly as good a test. Whereas the people that are fiddling about in the warm-up and doing little bits of this and little bits of that, and you're not necessarily drawn to them because it doesn't look spectacular, but then they can go in and produce this beautiful, organised, fluent test. So, two lessons from that. One is like focus on yourself in that moment, what everybody else is doing, and it doesn't matter even if you're watching the warm-up when you're not already on, you're just watching. But I think it's really fascinating to watch the riders from the warm-up to the competition arena and see the ones that you can see go in and go, okay, now I'm in my test and I must sit still and I must do nothing, and everything falls apart, compared to the ones that go in and go, yeah, okay, now we're just going to build on everything that we've just been working on for the last 40 minutes, and there we go.
Yeah. That's the hard part. So one thing I always stress with my students, and I know you all in your teaching as well and with your own training, is the basics. And so the training scale, that really is the foundation of everything. Rhythm, suppleness, and connection. Like those first 3 levels of the training scale are so important. So maybe Steffen wants to start. I know both of you guys do a lot of training and coaching. How important are the basics, and why is it not a bad thing to have to go back to the basics and not just practice the movements?
Yeah, I think everybody has a pretty good understanding of rhythm, but I think we learn this relatively easy. But honestly, this whole understanding of suppleness, I personally believe it's the biggest misunderstood concept in the whole sport. That we really need to have an understanding that even in the warm-up, when we look for suppleness and when we work on suppleness, our horse needs to have an understanding of suppleness. It's not just a biomechanical issue, where the horses need to do this with their neck, this with their top line, and you name it. But truly understanding suppleness. Yeah, and again, I think the biggest misunderstood concept, where I believe horses need to be so supple in the warm-up and in the beginning. So when we say later on, okay, now we're doing some movements and we gently allow the horse to go a little bit more to the contact, it doesn't escalate and it doesn't become into this really, really solid, heavy freight train looking pulling match. Yeah? So understanding suppleness. I'd like to go with my horse, for instance, down the long side. When I apply my right leg with a little counter flexion, I'd like the horse to understand that we move ever so slightly, maybe just a few inches towards the center line. And they understand, okay, the right leg has a lot to do with the right bend. Then we turn into a circle left and we let the horse yield a little bit to the left leg. And while the horse is yielding, I want to feel that there are 4 or 5 steps, maybe even a quarter of a circle, where we can give the inner rein and the horse holds a moment that little bit of bend. I'm not talking about cranking the neck to the inside, but holding the shape of a 20-meter circle. This should be possible when we apply the inner leg. We should be able to give the inner rein, pet the horse on the neck. Again, we make a little audio signal too by patting the horse on the neck. They hear that they're being rewarded. Yeah? And before you know it, horses understand suppleness. Yeah? It's not just a biomechanical issue where we just warm up the muscles and then we hope our horses get looser. They have to understand it. And if that means I need to go a moment back to the walk and do some half passes and from a half pass going to a leg yield, then that's perfectly fine. I would do that with any horse, for instance, later on when there's a issue in a pirouette and I lose the suppleness. I might go back to a walk pirouette and explain what I'm looking for. Yeah. So I would even take it a step further down where I'm just thinking rhythm, suppleness, just those two, and everything builds from there. I recently had a clinic and the rider said, yeah, first, I got to get this going behind, I said, look, your horse should be in front of the leg, but then you should not forget the first 2 rules, rhythm, suppleness. Get your horse a little bit looser, make him supple. Yeah, and again, I'm always a little bit concerned when people say too soon, push him more into the bridle, more into the hand. I'm very, very careful with that. Of course, we know we can get the hind legs from that more. Yeah, we might get more expression in a movement. But what about the mouth at that time? Yeah. Now, when the horse accepts too much contact, and nowadays there's so much weight on that when we go through the test, the judges really look at the mouth a lot. And I think if we really understand, and our horses understand suppleness, true suppleness in the beginning, we're in good shape. There's so many people that teach hind legs, hind legs, hind legs, and I'd like to teach suppleness, suppleness, suppleness.
So, I mean, the basics are everything. But it's an interesting one with the scales of training. I use it very much as a system. But the thing that you have to remember is that the order in which the scales come actually depend. They vary, I believe, depending on the horse. And, sometimes I also think that straightness should be in with suppleness and contact and rhythm, because for me, you can't actually have a horse that's supple if it's not also quite straight.
Mm-hmm.
And suppleness, so when I talk about suppleness, two different kinds. So you have your lateral suppleness, but you also have longitudinal suppleness. But I think that combined with straightness, I talk a little bit more about alignment and the horse being aligned through the whole body, because I think, sometimes people think suppleness and they're like, look how supple he is, look how supple he is. And the horse is like this. And you're like, well, okay. The relationship between the horse actually being supple all the way through the body and not just having a kink at one point of the body. So, they're simple but so complicated to really understand properly. And I think the other things that I talk about with the scales of training, with the rhythm, so rhythm, yes, 4-beat walk, 2-beat trot, 3-beat canter, but it's about the adjustability of that rhythm. And because that is where I would take into consideration with a less experienced rider, that's where they can test how reactive the horse is, how in front of the leg the horse is. Can they adjust the rhythm of the walk, of the trot, of the canter? And these things, it sounds easy, just adjust it, but it's amazing how many people can't, how it's actually really quite hard to have the adjustability over those things. So, and balance is something that is not mentioned as such in the scales of training, but it is actually essential to developing all of them. If you are not developing your horse's balance and self-carriage, you can't really improve anything else at the same time. So I think, this is actually probably going to be a little bit the topic of my demo, because it is, for me, the foundation of everything. And also, how much of the time do you spend working your horses on your own? I actually only see Carl every 6 weeks, maybe for a couple of days. I see David online every so often. I'm very lucky that I work with my sister, but we're both very busy and actually hardly ever help each other. So, 90% of the time I am training on my own. I'm here, I don't have a coach here, I'm here on my own, warming up on my own. So, you have to be able to make decisions on your own. And I think that having something like the scales of training to just sort of fall back on, as if you get on one day and you're like, your head's thinking about work or family or whatever, you can get on and just be like, okay, we're going to think about rhythm and whether it's adjustable. We're going to think about how good is our suppleness. You can find something really productive just by going to your scales of training. But I think I like to think of them more as a circle rather than a scale, and they're a little bit interchangeable depending on the horse and the rider and where that person is at that point in time. But they are the foundation of everything. The long and the short of it is that when you go down that centre line, you are on your own. So, you have got to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And I actually have really quite a strong policy. I sort of, since Paris, have had a couple of international riders come and be based with me. But I won't teach them every time they ride. I might know, I will teach you, 2 times a week, and then you will train 2 times a week. I will be there,
Yes,
and I can, support and help, but you actually have to ride on your own and make your own decisions.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that. I hope not too many trainers are losing some business now. That was not our intention.
No, that's wonderful to hear, because I know a lot of riders that I work with online, like, you guys are out there alone. You don't have access to good training. You're trying to figure it out on your own, and that's why these systems, like the training scale, are so important that you understand, so that when you're running into a problem, when something's going wrong, you can go back and you can think about the rhythm, or is my horse supple? Do I need to do a circle or a bending leg yield? It's so important that you have that ability to problem solve with some kind of a structure, and also for our horses, that we're training them with a systematic approach, because otherwise, your horse is just as lost as you are, if not more. I'm curious though, one thing that we do a lot in our online programs is video, and I feel like videoing yourself or having mirrors is so useful for when you are, on your own or you don't have a coach. How much do you guys use video as a tool?
So I don't use it loads, but I do use it, and I definitely use it from a competition point of view. Kim, who's my amazing groom, she'll video my training sessions here, which I then watch, and then obviously I'll watch, the playback from my test. But I had, a really educational experience during COVID, because obviously, nobody, David is actually, he has a lot of health issues, so he was really, really locked down during COVID. And it was before we really got the whole online thing going. And he said, send me some videos, do some videos and send me some videos, and I'll have a look and give you some feedback. So I do the video and watch it and be like, well, I'm not sending him that. So then I funnily enough go away and make it a lot better all on my own, and then video it and send him, and he's still finding a million things to say that needed to be better. But you have to be, I do teach a lot of people that they're like, oh no, I can't watch my videos, it's just too unbearable. And I'm like, no, you've got to be able to look at it and be constructively critical. You are not looking at it to be like, this and this is wrong. You need to look at it and be able to see the good things as well as the things that you need to make better. But it is an invaluable tool, especially when you are on your own a lot. It tells you a lot more than mirrors. Mirrors are great for a few things, but video can be brilliant.
I know you guys are busy today, but I wanted to just wrap up with, I know you both have been to the Olympics. Do you have a favorite Olympic moment that you want to share?
My sort of pinch me moment was definitely standing on the podium in Paris with the 8 other riders from the team competition, because it was just. I think some of the people on that podium were people that I have been role models for me for years. I've looked up to them for years. They've been my inspiration every day. And then to be standing with Lottie, who I actually used to teach when she was a pony rider, only a little bit. She lived about 2 hours away from me, but we had the British youth system, and I taught her sometimes when she was not able to get her pony on the bit. True story. And to see how far she has come with how hard that girl has worked and continues to work every day, and her focus and determination, is just absolutely phenomenal. So to be standing next to both your idols and the people that you've seen come from, very humble beginnings up to doing something like that, it was pretty super cool.
Can you give us a little bit insight on your freestyle, on the music,
yes.
And can you share a little bit?
So it will be my Beatles music.
Great.
I love doing the freestyles. I think I love music. Got a really cool guy that I work with to do my music, and he sort of, we talked about the other things that we were going to use, and as soon as I got that music back, I was like, okay, it's great. But it was actually quite I think making new music is one of the most difficult things.
Sure.
You know, trying to find something. I really have decided that from my point of view now, when I'm thinking about music, I think about it from my point of view because I have to love it, but also for the audience. I think for the audience, it's much more important for the audience than for the judges.
Absolutely.
You know, the judges have so much to think about when they are judging a freestyle. They're judging the technical aspect, the choreography. You know, they really have a tough job in that, I think. And I just don't think they can actually be listening to the music all that much. So yeah, I think about the music from the point of view of people watching it.
Love it.
So yeah.
Very good, very good. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed that interview. Like I said, these were just some of the highlights, but make sure to subscribe to my channel. I post a new YouTube video every single Wednesday to help you out with your horse. My mission is dressage for all, and all of us riders, whether you're Steffen Peters or Becky Moody, or you're just riding at home in the backyard with your horse, you matter. Your journey matters. We're all striving towards the same things: a deeper seat, a lighter leg, a softer hand, and through education, we can do this, and we can improve, and we can learn to love our ride. Thanks so much for being here.